Hello, and welcome back to our Shiny Basics tutorial. I'm Lindsay Wazzola, and last time I walked everyone through a really basic visualization of the sample loblolly pine dataset and talked a bit about the anatomy of a Shiny app using the example app that loads when you make a new app. Today we're going to dig more into the specific loblolly pine app that we're trying to build, and I've opened a copy of the app here to show you what we're going for. Now, before we get any further, if you haven't watched Shiny Basics 1, go ahead and go back and watch that video and then come back and meet us over here. So this is the app that we're going to be building today. And this is, again, a really simple app that I've made just to get us all comfortable with the basic anatomy of a Shiny app. This is the plot that we made in the first video where we have pine age on the x-axis and height in feet on the y-axis. And over here we have a sidebar panel, which we learned about a little bit in the previous video. And we've got some text telling us what to do. And we have a slider input with the title Pine Ages. So we change the Pine Ages slider. What we see is that when we move it, we're subsetting the ages, the data to include only trees whose age is less than or equal to our specified input via the slider. So I'm going to go ahead and close this app now. And I'm coming back to the text of the Old Faithful app, which we're going to start mostly just wholesale deleting here. So I'm going to delete all these comments up top because we don't need those. I'm going to leave the library Shiny call because of course we do need that. And I'm going to start clearing out these comments so that we can put some of our own. And I'm going to delete everything in UI except for that fluid page call. And then likewise in server, I'm just going to delete everything inside the outside set of curly brackets. And then we'll leave that Shiny app call there. So at this point, we just have an absolutely skeletal Shiny app. And if we click Run App, of course we have to save, we see a blank box. And this is exactly correct because what we've done is just created the empty shell in which we're going to build our app. Now, if we wanted to add just one layer to our empty shell, we can come over here and just start typing text. So we can just sort of put anything that we want to into fluid page. We'll just have to start using layouts and our other Shiny tools to start making it look nice. But we can type loblolly in here, run and save again. And there we go. Our little bit of text, loblolly, appears up in there. And once again, just to remind ourselves, the fluid page function makes a page that's defined by rows and columns. And that's going to be a really nice feature when you get into more complex layouts where you have mixes of figures and plots and text. It'll make it much easier to make everything line up nicely. So the next thing that we're going to do is start building our user interface, our UI up here. So just recalling again from our last conversation, the UI sort of defines the website as the user sees it. So this is where all of our input widgets, all of our text and figures and interactive plots are going to go. And this is also how we're going to structure sort of the website architecture of the app. Although one of the nice things about Shiny is that we don't have to think about the mechanics of that too much. We mostly just have to think about making a logical structure and flow for our users. So we're going to use the sidebar layout. First, we're going to delete our text. We don't need that anymore. So we're going to use the sidebar layout. And you're going to notice as I do this that I'm going to do my best to keep these parentheses sort of bumped out because R doesn't have semantic indenting like Python or some other languages, which means that we can really take advantage of the flexible interface that we get to give ourselves some little cues about where different functions open and close. So we're going to add the sidebar layout, which means, of course, we need a sidebar panel. And in our sidebar panel, we're going to start adding some text. So I really like the sidebar layout because it creates a great natural flow for people who are looking at apps and expecting to read left to right. So that's a great place to put our input widgets and to put instructions and welcomes and all that jazz. So we are going to say, welcome to our Lob Lolly Pine app. And you'll hear me say this a lot, but one of the cool things about Shiny is that a lot like R Markdown, you can kind of use little bits of other languages sometimes. So in this case, we're just going to use a couple of little bits of HTML, this BRBR, which each of these is a line break. So that creates a nice little visual spacer for us. So I like to break text up into chunks. So we'll have that initial welcome text, then we'll break it up a little bit, and then we're gonna start giving our users some instructions. And again, because we're working in R, our indenting and our line breaks are not actually meaningful from the app's perspective, so we can take full advantage to give ourselves nice human readable code. So now we're going to give our users some instructions. We're going to say, please select the ages of pines whose growth you wish to view. And then we'll do another couple of these little breaks here. And then we're going to start on our slider input. So as we saw in the Old Faithful app, slider inputs are a really nice way to collect user data for continuous variables. So we're going to start with the slider input function, and we're going to call our slider ages from R's perspective. And then we're going to tell R to display to the user the text pine ages. So once again, this first line is what R sees, and this is what the user sees. And then we have to give our slider a minimum range and a maximum range. So we're going to set that from 1 to 25, which was the range of our data. And then we're going to set the value at 25. So that has the effect of making it so that the initial plot displays all of the pine data. And now we have to have a comma here because we are giving some indication of where we're separating the different parts of that sidebar layout. So as we discussed in the previous video, our sidebar layout needs two elements, sidebar panel, and down here, a main panel. And main panel just has to exist. It doesn't necessarily have to have anything in it yet. And I'm just doing a little bit of parentheses wrangling there to give myself some nice visual cues. So at this point, let's run this and see what we have. Cool, check this out. We have a sidebar with a totally functional slider. It doesn't do anything yet, but it does work. So that's fun. So now I wanna pause a moment and come down here into server. So if you remember from our last video, server is kind of the actual computer side of this. So this is the brains behind the beautiful user interface. Server is taking the user inputs and it's doing operations and it's passing them back to UI to show to the user. So inside server, we're going to use this function render plot. And we're going to, once again, use the special nested curly bracket inside parentheses notation. And what that tells Shiny is that everything that's going to happen in this set of brackets is reactive. So everything that happens inside the brackets is going to depend on user inputs. And once again, this is sort of the secret sauce of taking all of our user inputs and doing our operations with them and then passing them back, that connection between user interface and server. So using our render plot function, we are going to create an object called pine plot that'll go in our output object. So I'm going to type output pine plot. I'm going to say render plot. So just as up here we're creating inputs in the user interface, down in the server we're creating outputs that we're then going to pass back up to user interface. So inside our render plot function, we are going to essentially do what we did back over in our base R plotting code. The only difference is that instead of updating the data to include only single measures that we determine, we're going to let the users determine what age range they are interested in observing pine growth over. So the first thing we're going to do, like we did in the static plotting code, is we're going to create a second data frame called loblolly small. But instead of filtering it using just the static square brackets, we're going to keep only those rows of loblolly where loblolly age is less than or equal to input ages. So up here, remember, we are creating an input object called ages. And down here, we're receiving that information and using it to keep only rows from the data frame loblolly that meet the user's condition. And that's all happening inside this reactive context that we're accessing using render plot. Next, we're quite simply going to make our plot. So we will say plot loblolly small age on the X, and we're going to make our Y variable loblolly small height, and then we'll add some labels. Okay, and we make sure that all of our brackets are closed. So there's our render plot bracket is closed, and there our larger server bracket is closed. And then I'm going to hit run app. And our app hasn't changed. And our app hasn't changed because despite the fact that we're collecting user input and updating it and sending it from UI to server, we haven't created the utility for server to pass that plot back to UI. So if we come back down into our code, we need to come back up to our user interface, and we're going to type plot output, and then we're going to say pine plot. So, and putting pine plot in quotes like this in this function tells Shiny to look for an object called pine plot inside of our output container that's being sent from server back to UI. So let's hit run app one more time. And there's our plot. We're going to update the slider and make our pine tree age smaller. And there we go. We have a dynamically updating plot. So to sum up what we learned in this video, we reviewed the fact that user interface up here controls what the user sees and interacts with on the website, but the actual content of the site is generated by server. Server collects user inputs using widgets like the slider input and does operations using the user inputs in a reactive context that it uses to make the interactive visualizations and outputs that animate Shiny apps. Those are sent back up to user interface via outputs that we display using functions like plot output. So that's our very basic Shiny app. Um, I hope that you have enjoyed following along with us, and I'm very excited to share more with you soon.